Also, by the way, if anyone has any questions about any of this as I'm going through, please do shout out. So how this relates to method grid? Well, we use different models for different purposes. Different AI features in the app will use different models. One of the important things to note here is that both within method grid and in other AI applications you'll see, it's not necessarily one model that is running everything. Sometimes what will happen, and is going to happen in the demos I'm going to show you later, is when you first start interacting with an AI model, actually you're just talking to a controller model, and based on what you say to it or what you're doing, it will then pass that request off to a more specialized model that is trained to do a specific task, and that's the model you'll be talking to. So yeah, that's what within method grid we have different models that do different things. The next term that often gets used and misused quite a lot is training. So when we talk about training AI models, I mentioned before, all of this is numbers. Within a model, you have a bunch of parameters, which are just numbers. To give you an idea of how many numbers we're talking here, ChatGPT version 3.5 had 175 billion parameters. So there's 175 billion different numbers that control its behavior. So when you input some stuff into that model, it does some maths with those 175 billion different numbers before you get your output. And the purpose of training a model is to find the values of those parameters. What numbers can we give to those parameters that, when we give it certain inputs, will give us good outputs? So that's the point of training, is to find these parameters. There's different types of training. I'll briefly go through them because I think they're important to know, like I said, in terms of building up a bit of a marketing BS detector. You'll often hear people say that their organization has trained a model, and that could mean many, many different things. So it's important to be able to understand what do they mean by that. So firstly, pre-training. What pre-training a model means is you've absolutely trained it from scratch, so you didn't know any of the values of any of those parameters, and you start training it from scratch. At first, it was just doing things totally at random. It had no knowledge of anything. And the way you essentially train them, you give it lots of correct answers. So in the example I had before of the letter A, and it was predicting what letter it is, you'd give it thousands of images of the letter A, and you'd say to it, these are all A's. You'd give it thousands of images of B's. You'd say these are all B's, C's, etc. And it then figures out what parameters would give me the correct answer. When I do that maths with those inputs to get those correct answers that you've given me, what parameters would give me those answers? And that's what training is doing, is it's trying to find the correct values for all of these parameters. And when you're pre-training, you're doing that absolutely from scratch. Now, with language models like Google's Gemini, Meta's Llama, ChatGPT, that takes a very, very long time because they have a lot of parameters and need a lot of data to train them on. For a bit of context, Llama, which is Meta's open source large language model, was trained on about 1 trillion words of data. That has 70 billion parameters, I think. And it took them literally months of an entire warehouse of GPUs running to train that. So unless you've got tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, you're not pre-training your own language model. It's just not possible for anyone but the biggest tech firms. This is important. If someone comes along and tells you they've trained their own model, they probably don't mean they've pre-trained it themselves from scratch. So that brings us on to fine-tuning. What fine-tuning means is you've taken a model that is already being pre-trained and you're training it to do a more specific task. So you've taken, let's say, an image recognition model that can recognize images and shapes generally, and you're training it to do something specific like face recognition. It doesn't take as much data as pre-training because it already has some knowledge of what shapes look like. It's already learned some of that. Similarly with language, you can take a language model that already has some knowledge of language in its parameters, and you give it some more data and you fine-tune it for something specific, say translation or sentiment analysis. And that that is within the realms of, an everyday organization to do. It takes significantly less data, significantly less time, significantly less money. Third one, reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning was something that wasn't used in language until relatively recently. What reinforcement learning is, you don't have any data, you don't know what the correct answer is, you kind of just let the model do things at random, and then it sees it sees from the outcome whether or not that was good or bad. This was often used in the sort of 90s when computers were learning how to play chess. So what they basically did, they just let a computer play a game of chess and make moves totally at random. And then at the end of the game, it would know, well, did it win the game or not? If it won the game, it'll go, well, those were probably good moves. I should do them in the future. If it lost the game, those are bad moves. I'll avoid doing them in the future. And after playing millions and millions of games of chess, it starts to figure out what a good chess move looks like. Now, if on ChatGPT or any other AI language models, sometimes you'll see it'll give you two options when you ask it something. It'll come up with two different possibilities, and it'll say which one of these is better. Or if you ask it to regenerate it, it'll say was this better or worse. That's actually reinforcement learning. They're doing that to let the model just sort of have a bit of a guess, have a bit of an explore, and they're asking you for the feedback, and you're basically helping to do this reinforcement learning of the language model. The last one, in-context learning. This is slightly different because we're not actually updating the parameters of a model. At this point, we're just giving the model some extra information as we're using it at the time. There's millions of different ways we can do this. This is a lot of what we do in MethodGrid. That gets me onto how does this relate to MethodGrid's AI. So we use pre-trained models. We're not training a language model from scratch because we don't have a warehouse full of hardware and £100 million to do it. Fine-tuning, I'll explain what this means. Fine-tuning is done for alignment, not knowledge. There was a research paper towards the end of last year written by researchers at Meta that was called Less is More for Alignment. Yeah, it's acronym LEMA, because everyone in AI loves an acronym. And what they found was fine-tuning models for knowledge isn't actually very good, because what that does, you're updating the parameters, and once knowledge is embedded in the parameters of a model, it's kind of impossible to get it back out again. So if your knowledge changes, you need to do something like that. You can't really just take it back out because it's impossible to see where it is in the model. When you look at the model, all you see is 170 billion different numbers. Which bits of them represent the knowledge you're actually trying to take back out? It's basically impossible to do. So instead we use fine-tuning for the format of the response, for the tone of it, things like that, not for the actual knowledge. All of the knowledge is provided in context because that allows us to be a lot more versatile, a lot more flexible. You can edit knowledge, you can delete knowledge as it gets updated, and that's all fine. We don't have to retrain a model again just to do that. So I think, okay, we're about to go into the discussion of the question we had before, but any questions on any of that before we do?
Just the second question. If you go to
I thought we were going to discuss the first question. Yeah. Any questions about any of that before we move on?
So to recognize the shape, I thought it did that by searching the internet, does it not?
No. It's
somebody has to input that.
It's when it learns from the learning data, it learns patterns from the shapes. So it might learn that something that vaguely looks like this might be an A. And then when you give it a new example that it hasn't seen before, it'll notice the pattern, and that pattern will make it output, this is an A, or this is more likely to be an A. It's not necessarily looking it up on the internet, no. Any other questions about any of that?
And when you say you can't delete, you said something about
Yeah.
you can't remove knowledge.
Yeah, because...
You go in there and say you must, if you're delivering a project, you must use MethodGrid, and somebody does it 1,000,000 times.
So if you've trained the model specifically with knowledge of MethodGrid,
Yeah.
and when I say trained, I mean updated the parameters of the model with knowledge of MethodGrid so that that knowledge is embedded in the parameters of the model, you can't take that knowledge back out again because currently, at some point in the distant future, maybe we will understand enough about the internal structure of these models to be able to do that. But right now, absolutely, it's impossible. Because, yeah, like I said, it's not, you can't open up the model and say, and point to which bits of the model encode certain knowledge, because it's all just numbers. All you see is a ton of different numbers. And trying to glean any sort of information. I'm literally doing a PhD on that. It's very difficult.
Mark, quick question. So if that bit around fine-tuning is done for alignment rather than knowledge, and if knowledge is embedded in the parameters, it's a problem because you can't update it. Some of the models that we've got access to at the moment, like the ChatGPTs and things, have those been fine-tuned with knowledge in the parameters? So is that going to be a problem?
Yes, it is, which is why they have to keep updating it and bringing out new versions of it, because knowledge they have is out of date and you can't just remove it.
So is there any models at the moment that, or large language that are being trained using parameters as alignment rather than knowledge that you know of, or is that... You
sort of have to have knowledge in the parameters, because in the initial stages for the pre-training, it also, like before pre-training, it literally knows nothing. It doesn't even know what a sentence looks like. If you ask it something, it will just output words and punctuation completely at random. So, I mean, it's learning everything from like how to structure a sentence, what a full stop is. Before you pre-train it, it doesn't know the difference between a full stop and a word. But in order to teach it, in order for it to learn that, it kind of has to pick up certain knowledge of what words mean. So when you train it, you have to have some knowledge embedded in there. But that's sort of used as a baseline for them when you fine tune. But yeah, that's why they keep updating, bringing out new versions of it, because the knowledge in the parameters is out of date or is wrong. Or yeah.
So is the knowledge different between, say, Claude and ChatGPT and...
If they've been trained on different data, yes. A lot of the data they're trained on there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of data sets that are publicly available that they have used. Wikipedia is the main example. A lot of them use Wikipedia for training. There is other data sets as well, but so they will. Yeah, so a lot of knowledge from Wikipedia will be in all of them. But they'll have some that they own that isn't publicly available as well. Right, should we move on to discussion if there's any?
How do you rate organisations trust in AI, and how do you use your organisation's data?
Pretty badly.
Pretty badly. On the whole, low, I think is the answer, right?
Yeah, which I think there's, and I'd like to get people's opinions on this, because there's two different ways you can interpret trust, I think. One is trust in it in sort of data privacy. Is it doing dodgy things with your data, things like that? The other way you can interpret trust is, do you trust its output? As in, do you believe what it's saying? Do you think it's any good? So I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that. How have you interpreted that? And
well, I'm both contexts there for me, Mark. It's, and I've heard you speak many times, and this is great. I think for me, as my knowledge of it, and I get most of that from you, by the way, not Wikipedia, as my knowledge of it and how AI actually works, and it's not how we think, some people think it works, I get better in my trust of it and what it's doing with my data I'm inputting. But again, as the model has got older, and I'm still on GPT-4, the one I pay for, I'm finding the responses, I'm getting better with the prompts, but I'm finding the responses are not as good as they have been. I don't know if that's me getting better with my prompts and refining, or I don't know if there's something happening with the model and what you've just said about that knowledge going out of date, being wrong, it's learning more crap, the way I put it in my language. I'm not sure yet. So that's where my trust sits. Some of the output is absolute rubbish. It used to be I found it a lot better. Less with it to do what I needed to do with it. So I think it's two parts of that, and I'm not quite sure how much privacy is behind what I'm putting into it as well.
I mean,
it's a bit of both.
Yeah, definitely. To give my opinion on this, I think it's probably healthy for the answer on this to be a bit low. Like, I think both in terms of trust in the output, I think a healthy amount of skepticism is good. They can be wrong. And similarly with, and obviously it's going to depend on organisation to organisation. If you're using Method Grid's AI, you should completely trust what we're doing with your data. But, other organisations, that might not be true.
That's the one I use most.
So that's going to vary by organisation. As, how organisations use your data, even in a non-AI context, is going to vary from organisation to organisation.
I think a number of people, we were quite early adopters driven by how do we build playbooks quicker. It's kind of, we're going to, it's a long lead time to value. But I remember I did WWA's playbook and speaking to James. This is 12 months ago, I spoke to him recently. It's like, he was quite nervous about the use of AI. So I'm not sure. I met him, I think about a month ago. He's like, yeah, you use it for proposals, we use it for this, we use it. I think a lot of people are similar. It's kind of the fear reaction. I don't know much about it, I don't understand it. I'm going to be a little bit hesitant to take a step to it. I think what we've seen over the last 12, 18 months, a lot more people now are actually, I've embraced it, I've understood it, I've been on that journey, and I'm much more happier with it as what it's doing and how it adds value to my business.
I think some stuff you've already talked about today will allay some of that fears about AI within Method Grid, and I think making that a bit more prominent about where that data, someone inputs into their Method Grid, into your AI, what happens to their data that's going into, I think it's clear to some of us, but I think a bit more clarity on, and a big message saying this stays, your proprietary stuff stays in there in your area.
I think the worry a lot of people have, which we don't do, is that when you input things to your grid or to the AI, that we're using that to then train some central AI model that all our clients are using, and potentially your data can leak out. That is 100% not happening. That's not how we use it.
I know that, Marc.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure people looking in from the outside, who haven't got that knowledge and are not insiders per se, would understand that, and that might be a fear. That was certainly my fear until you explained it. So.
Even ChatGPT or like the Microsoft host one, they don't. I know it's a lot of people think, if I put some in here, they're training the model to improve it. Fundamentally, your requests last 30 days in that instance.
Yeah, in our Azure one, that is 100% true.
Deleted. They don't want to train it on.
Well, this is what I was saying. Can I pay somebody in China to say, what I'm doing is the best thing? 1 million people just tapping away for 5 days. Now you said that to search your stuff out of Wikipedia, I don't trust it anymore. I won't be using it.
Fair enough. Any more thoughts on that? Are we happy to move on? Okay, next question for you to have a little think about while I'm talking. How would you rate your organisation's current confidence in the understanding and use of AI? So how well do people in your organisation understand AI and how it works? And how good are they at using it? So while people are answering that, I will keep talking. So what is a large language model? I sort of briefly said what a model is and how they work. Large language models are a subset of models, so everything I said about AI models generally is true of large language models. The most surprising fact of that is that they work with numbers. So the input to a large language model is numbers. The output from a large language model is numbers. All of the parameters inside a large language model are numbers, which raises the quite obvious question, well, when I'm talking to them, I'm typing words and it's outputting words, so what do you mean? So the first thing that happens when we use a large language model is this bit, which is called embedding, and that is where it translates the words that you type into numbers. And it does that in such a way that the numbers of similar words will be similar to each other. So, for example, the numbers that represent the word dog and the numbers that represent the word puppy will be fairly close numerically. Versus, say, the numbers that represent the word France will be further away from the numbers that represent dog and puppy. So the idea is these numbers representing these words sort of encapsulate what the words mean. There's quite a famous example of this, which is sort of fascinating, where if you take the numeric representation of the word king, and you take the numeric representation of the word man and the word woman, and because they're all numbers, you can do maths with them. So you take the numbers for king, you minus the numbers for the word man, plus the numbers for the word woman. The answer you get is very, very close to the embedding you get for the word queen. Which is kind of crazy that you can do maths with words and it makes sense. So that is the first thing that happens, is you embed the words, so you get a bunch of numbers. You then feed them into the model. Same thing I was talking about before, parameters in the model. You do maths between the input numbers and the parameter numbers, and you get output, which is also numbers. To give you an idea of the scale of these things, I already said large language models have hundreds of billions of these numbers in their parameters. The inputs, so each word, and I'm basing this off Llama, which is Meta's model, because that's the one I know most about. Each word is represented by 4,000 numbers. So if you import, let's say, 1,000 words, each of those words has 4,000 numbers. That's 4 million numbers in your input. You have 4 million numbers, 100 billion numbers. There's a lot of maths going on, is the point. You can, I think, start to build up an idea of why these things take up so much hardware and why, these massive companies have huge warehouses full of hardware for running these things. There's a lot of maths going on. I'm not going to get into details of the maths, but it's surprisingly not as complicated as you'd think. Like, if you ever want to look it up, do. It's not that complicated as you'd think it would be. But the output of all of this is some more numbers. In this case, it's probabilities for what the next word of a sentence is. So if we import the phrase to be or not to be, that is the output of that, after it's been embedded and some maths has happened, is going to be the probabilities for what the next word is. Now, it's probably going to, I made these numbers up, but it's probably going to be, there's a 90% chance it's the word question, there's a 7% chance it's the word dilemma, 2% chance it's the word choice, whatever. It'll output a probability for every single word in the English language and all grammar. And that is literally all large language models do. They predict what the next word is. Even when you're having full-blown conversations with them, all they are doing is predicting the next word. So if you say to it, what is 2 plus 2? All it's doing is predicting what the next word in that conversation is. And probably the next word in that conversation is 4. It's not actually doing any maths to figure out what 2 plus 2 is. If you say to it, what's the capital of France? It's just predicting that the next word in that conversation is Paris. Even when the answer is, a whole sentence, all it's doing is predicting the first word of the sentence, then it's predicting the second word of the sentence, then it's predicting the third word of the sentence. It's not doing anything more fancy than that. It's just predicting the next word. And I think understanding this can start to give you a better understanding of why they output the things they do. Why they hallucinate, as it's called. Hallucinate is what it means when they just make stuff up. And they hallucinate because if you ask them a question that they don't know the answer to, all they're going to do is output what the likely next word of that conversation is. And because they've been trained on data from the internet, things like that, if someone asks a question, the next likely sentence isn't, sorry, I don't know. What's likely is that someone's answered the question. So that's what it does. It gives an answer to the question. That answer might not be right, but that's what it does. And the reason it does things like that is because all it's doing is predicting what comes next. Any questions about that before we move on?
So is ChatGPT a large language model?
Yeah.
Or is that, okay.
It's doing exactly this. It's just predicting the next. When you're having a conversation with it, it's just predicting what the next word is in the conversation.
Now, in terms of hallucination, the story that one of the guys that I used to work with told me, it's true or not, it might have got it from ChatGPT. Hallucination is where you put in a prompt into ChatGPT to say, give me a full legal argument. This is one he talks about in an example. Give me a legal argument to beat this case I'm fighting. I think it was a lady in Australia did that. And it did give her a full legal argument with precedents, all the legal things in it, which didn't exist. And she used that in court.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing that, yeah.
She made it up because she asked it to give her a legal argument, and it did.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, if, in all of the training data it will have seen, where it's seen the sentence, give me a legal argument for, the next bit is just going to be a load of legal stuff. It's not going to be...
She calls it cases that
Yeah.
just never happened.
I think this is why people need to learn more about... Yeah. No, we had one, I did a demo, this was an internal thing a few months ago, where I showed a conversation with ChatGPT for, potential feature in method grid, where I said, can you summarize this grid for me? Here's the URL. And it gave a nice answer that sounded really good. And then I said, okay, how about this other URL? And I think it was like methodgrid.com/how-to-bake-a-cake. And it came back with, oh, this grid's about how to bake a cake. It has all these instructions. And the grid just doesn't exist. It was just having a complete guess based on what the URL was. So yeah, going back to the trust, you should be a bit skeptical of the output any AI model gives you. And the more you use them, you do get used to what they're good at, what they're not good at, and how to kind of spot when it's making stuff up. But it's definitely something you need to be aware of.
And it depends what data is being put into it.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, models, they're only as good.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're only as good as the data they're trained on. Absolutely. Sorry, Marc.
So when you've got 3 answers, you show you only the highest probability.
Yeah, so that's a good question because there's a lot of different ways of doing this. So yeah, the output, like I said, is these probabilities. Yeah, that's one way of doing it is you just pick the highest one. There's other ways of doing it. If you've ever used the ChatGPT kind of interface they have for their API, no one might have used it, but there's a setting in there called temperature. And what temperature does is it's about how it uses these probabilities. So at a very low temperature, it'll do exactly that. It'll just pick the highest probability. If you raise the temperature, it's like raising the randomness. So then it might sometimes it'll pick, a less likely word rather than just picking.
Situations when I didn't think the answer was right and said, this doesn't seem right. So does that mean that then it goes and picks the next probability?
If you're carrying on the conversation, it'll just be doing the same thing again. It'll be guessing what the next word of that conversation is, including your sort of correction of it. But certainly not necessarily with ChatGPT, because you don't really have control over what it's doing. All you can do is, but when you actually have the model and you're running it yourself on your own hardware, you can get the raw output as a probability. And yeah, you can do different things with it then. You can try the first one. If that's nonsense, try the second one. Yeah, but you can only really do that with models that you have access to, which with ChatGPT you don't, because it's a sort of closed source. Their name, OpenAI, is very ironic.
Can you ask a model to implement another model if it understands the underlying logic of that model?
That's an interesting question. And actually one of the things because I use these all the time for writing code. Pretty much every day I use AI to help me write code and stuff. One of the things it's really bad at is doing AI research. Slightly ironically, I think just because there isn't as much code out for it to learn from. It certainly can. Theoretically, there's no reason it couldn't. I just think because there's less of that sort of code in its training data, it's not as good. Just because it's a newer thing. But in theory, yes, there's no reason it couldn't. Are you worried about them self-replicating and taking over the world? Is that?
I've been doing a course, a master's on this lately, and
Oh,
it's
okay.
opened my eyes up to a lot of stuff. But I was kind of going, right, could you containerize 10 different models and then have a wrapper which sits around them and then specify, give me the output of one model, give me the output.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah. No, definitely. You could run, there's a word for that. I'm trying to remember what it is. Don't know. If it comes to me, I'll say. But yeah, there's absolutely that sort of thing where you can have multiple models working together or giving them, is it called an elective? Where they kind of vote on the output and then you take kind of the majority of what the models think, you take that as the answer. Yeah, that's definitely a thing that you can do, yeah. Anyone else, or should we move on? Let's move on. What is source grounding? So this is one of the demos that I'm going to show you in a minute. So source grounding is about when a large language model generates you some outputs, by default, it'll just use the knowledge encapsulated in its parameters, which might be what you want, but it might not. You might have some data in your organization that you wanted to use, some knowledge that you wanted to use that it doesn't have encapsulated in its parameters. And source grounded, you might also see it referred to as a RAG model, which stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. We generally haven't used that term because RAG means something else to most people in this room. But basically just giving existing data to a large language model as you're using it that isn't embedded in its parameters so that it will use that knowledge when it generates its output. We're going to see that in a demo in a minute. So how does MethodGrid currently use your organization's data? So this is quite an important point about trust and data security in AI. So the first thing to say, all data is stored in the UK. It doesn't go to the US, it doesn't go to OpenAI, it doesn't go anywhere else. It's on our Microsoft Azure infrastructure, which we have complete control over. It never leaves that. Anything typed in is only stored for 30 days. It is not used to train any models. It is not used for any other purposes. And the AI models only have access to the data that you do. So all of the permissions within MethodGrid, if you have access to certain grids, then the AI, when you use it, can have access to those grids. It won't have access to anything else. It's totally bound by the same permission system that the rest of the system is. Any questions about any of that? Everyone feeling reassured? Okay. Jody, do you want to?
Would you rate your organization's current competence again?
Pretty low.
Lower, even than the last one. Does anyone have training regimes going on for the use of AI, the understanding of AI internally? On the educational roadmap? Or do people just pick these things up and just...
We have some people in our digital team that are looking into AI, but it's like 2 people out of 100. So I answered low because the vast majority of people not really got.
I think that's probably good enough vast majority of this. You can have chat to you and take it off.
I mean, everyone sort of appreciates you're going to take it with yourself. I think when you come to, you mentioned source grounding, I think that will be the bit where people start getting more confidence when they know that it's locked in on their own data set. Whereas going out and testing it on a data set that no one has any idea really what's in there, i.e. Wikipedia, well, yeah, I don't blame them for not trusting it or necessarily having that much confidence.
Yeah.
I think once it comes back a little bit more in-house, people will be a little bit more confident, or maybe less confident, depending on the state of their organisation.
When we got pace, the reason we did it so quickly was that we just source grounded it on network rail code of conduct, the pace stand by the, I think it's like 12 supporting standards, and like the existing product descriptions, and it's like, okay, now you're ready to start engineering. And the speed of trying to do it is to say, look, I'm doing PNP, but PNP is referenced in loads of different standards, and I was like, it would take me, because I remember doing manual playbook build, it takes a long time to go through and go, oh, that I need to mention that, Whereas source grounding just instantly gives us the access to go, okay, quickly, right, fine, check it, yes, we're happy with it. But it was picking out references that even like humans or SMEs couldn't spot, and oh yeah, I forgot about that because that lived in module 2 or level 2 right down there. It's like, okay, well, it's giving you that ability to do things a lot faster, but you have to ground it, otherwise, I get thrown in for Google Pace, it would come up with a complete random thing about what Pace is.
Yeah. When you're doing that bit, just random thought things about it there. So when you're building that within AI, so it's for a complex thing, that's Pace is complex, and that very question. So when you're pulling that together through the AI, do you then have a reference that says this is where we got it all from?
Yeah,
you can ask, do an audit on it, in case someone said something particularly safety critical. You say, well, I've pulled out all the relevant ones.
Yeah, we experiment with a similar kind of network rail. I'll talk about a little bit later about what we do with Pace Digital, but one of the things is if I ask it a question, because the trust element is massive, and even Mike was the same, like, look, when we give it more data and say, look, can you go and just access all the lessons learned, or can you tell me, I'm doing this, can you tell me what standards this thing needs to think about. It's kind of like, well, we can do two ways. We can say, look, it can write the response, or what we can say is, look, it writes the response and then provides the reference by which it sourced that information from, so that it's kind of, it's not being made up. And I think a little bit will be, you'll need to prove that with references first, before then people go, do you know what, okay, fine, I'm trusted in how well this is trained.
For the people who answered low on that, do you think it's a lack of awareness of what kind of AI tools are out there and what AI can do, or is it a lack of trust? Is it a fear of it? Any thoughts?
I think it's quite interesting because a lot of people use it but hide the fact that they use it. So the fact that you actually said you use it for code made me kind of go, you're honest. Because a lot of people, I would use it for code sometimes. Sometimes it gives you back junk because it can't do something. But I see a lot of people using it for shortcuts, and my only concern with it is they don't have the understanding of how it's built in the first place, and then they're almost doing like the doubling down because they're not actually learning about how to code better, because they're taking the output, they're copying it in and going, oh, it works. They haven't really got to that process of going, this is how it works.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. Sorry to get a bit too sort of programming centric here. With programming and AI, because I wonder, because obviously I learned how to program before AI was a thing, and I do wonder how different it would be learning it now, when it's not. If that would be a temptation you'd have to avoid to just let AI do things for you, or if it'd be I think it'd be a weird time, I think, to be learning programming.
It's interesting because I'm doing something and I've never learned to code in Python, so I took something I did like 5 years ago in R. I put it in the ChatGPT and said, convert this to Python, and it worked.
Yeah.
And that was really impressive.
Yeah, no, it's really good at Python specifically. Python's probably the best one, the one it's best at.
That was a shock though, because then it made me go, right, okay.
Yeah.
It took me a long while to understand that and write that years ago, forget, but now it does it perfectly.
Yeah, no, it's. I think this is relevant to non-programming as well. That is there a danger of people, more junior people, if they rely on AI, do they never learn the things that?
When you said about obviously you've learned coding before and before AI, my example of this is not me. I'm too old. Everything happened before AI with me. But my partner works in marketing PR, and she's got some young people working for her, and she often uses my ChatGPT to help with this skills. But she comes with that experience like you've got pre-AI, so she knows everything. It's talking bollocks, it's talking rubbish. But when she's given some tasks to her junior staff to do it, they just do complete AI, and actually when she looks at it, she says, this is rubbish.
Yeah.
So I think there's a really good question, good point there. And for me, as someone who's old, and I've been around some Caesars walking around Gaul, that I'm confident in the use of it, understanding that I don't quite trust it, and I don't quite so my confidence is high in my use of it, but I'm not so sure I'd have such confidence in if I had, because I'm a one-man band now, but if I had a very young person in the organisation who's not been, and this is not disparaging them at all, because it's a different world we live in now. That's where I think if you've got an organisation of that, a wide demographic than just some greybeard, that then I think my confidence would be different.
Yeah.
And I think that, I think in that context, that's what when you said back there, that's when I think those would be different. For me, I'm not 100% done.
Yeah.
I've got it, I use it all the time, I understand the trust issue I've got with it, and what good and bad looks like. If you've never done anything else, how do you know?
Yeah,
and that's a very good point you make.
Yeah. So
conversely to the argument, if you take a car, you don't have to be a mechanic to drive a car. So we trust that the car works. You don't have to be the expert. So I think you want to have experts who can develop this and vet it, but at some point we have to trust it that it's right. We're going to get there.
I'll counter you on that one. I can't hallucinate a car.
You could probably build one. It probably wouldn't be a very good one.
So that's
I'm just saying, like the point of this is AI. Yes, it's new, but we've trusted in development and technology along the way. And if you take it, we would still be riding bicycles if we didn't do this.
Yeah.
So
Actually,
I think at some point, as long as it's done responsibly and you use AI maybe as the clay and things like that, And then you're not just taking it verbatim that is the truth, but you can kind of poke holes into it. But you can start, it's almost like a writer's block. You unblock this writer's block.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, actually, yeah.
Shortcuts. Because I know that some of our graduates use it to do their RSS ABC competencies, for example. So it's how you use it, and it's an interesting question, this one, because organisational confidence is an interesting question, because you'll have people who are expert at it and have 100% confidence in it. You'll have people who are probably of an older persuasion who have no confidence in it at all because they're scared of it. So I think the key thing is defining the appropriate use of it, but also sharing the knowledge. So what you've been telling us today, I think something that actually most organisations could do with a 101 of what AI actually is and what it means. And I think that's where we all fall down. We treat it as this holy grail, and actually don't really understand what it is.
Yeah.
I think a lot of execs are scared of it, and therefore there's a few blanket policies where they've just gone, I don't understand it, therefore no. And it's then there's people at the bottom line going, actually guys, it's not that, and it's just about raising awareness and education. But it's kind of a fear response. If you don't understand stuff, it's always going to take a while to do. It's kind of what I kind of wanted to focus this session really was just a bit more about the education about what is AI, so you guys can better understand it.
Yeah, no, definitely. So go, appreciate it.
Yeah, so I've got a couple of points. So listening to the conversation, I'm old enough to remember when they introduced calculators in schools. So it's a case of, well, actually, can you do maths? Well, nowadays you just use a calculator. So do you need the math skills to do it, or do you trust the calculators to answer? So I think we're potentially in 20 years, 30 years' time, it's exactly where we'll be.
Yeah, no, one of my mates, I remember, who works in AI as well, saying with sort of schools banning like ChatGPT and things like that, he said it reminds him of us being at school and people saying to him, you're not always going to have a calculator in your pocket. Well, of course, now we all do. Yeah, and it's a case of, learning how to use these things appropriately, responsibly, rather than just saying, no, don't use that, or go in the other extreme, use this for everything and just believe everything it says.
It's different for me. So trusting the calculator for me is like trusting the actual AI and how it learns, and I'm trusting that 100% or 99%, bugs notwithstanding. It's who's giving it the source information and what their agenda might be.
Yeah.
That is my concern. So the actual process of AI learning, no issue with that, but what's the source?
Yeah.
So my second point in terms of understanding, I think so at MGI, we sort of take the approach that we don't really understand AI very much, but if we look at a challenge, we ask the question, can AI help? So the latest thing that we've started to look at is when we're doing training videos, and we'll convert those audio and maybe subtitles into a foreign language, multiple foreign languages. So I've been working with a customer over the last few weeks about doing that very same thing. We were talking about whether we should use AI, and there was a real lack of trust that actually the outcome of that wouldn't be particularly positive or accurate, and actually we have no way, not speaking French myself, being able to validate, yep, that's correct. So there's a huge amount of trust there. So to the point where they then went to a traditional translation company who paid thousands to get a whole series of translations done. So, that's putting their money where their fear is, to a point.
Yeah.
That goes against the topic of this morning with innovation, though, because the truth is you could have done the test and then paid someone to validate it. That would have been much more economical.
Some of you see the paste videos on Paste Digital. That's all rendered using AI, mainly because we had to build videos. You can't film people, well you can, but you spend a fortune filming them. Take 20 and building videos and interactive media. It's all done through AI, and it's even an AI avatar that you're looking at, but it's now human rendered. The other one, which I think is probably, which Mike is doing, is we wanted the videos are being updated to support sign language. But again, the people that are doing sign language, it is not someone doing it. It's an AI avatar that's been coded to translate what are the signs for words, and it's done in literally Mike's I think it's close to £5,000 to do 60 videos into BSL. And it's that ability where AI is doing things a lot quicker and reducing the cost. Because I think, if I'm honest, producing video content without AI is probably cost prohibitive for most organisations. So paying for a photo shoot, film crew, take 20, take 30, pulling your hair out and doing it for capture. Now it's kind of actually it's done, that's the text I want to say, there's the visuals, that's the avatar, and also the cost of change is, but can we change that script because this has changed quickly? Yes, it's 5 minutes rather than a complete reshoot. So there are massive kind of innovation benefits that it does produce.
Cool. Any other thoughts on that before we move on? Let's carry on. Oh, that's what we've just talked about. Jody.
Okay, so this is the journey we are beginning on our AI roadmap, and this left to right is how Marc will step through the prototype demos of these. So this item here, content generation, already exists, because naturally the ChatGPT models are great at outputting content, so it was obviously the first thing we put in. So with that, you can set up templates within grids. It takes the title and it outputs all the content, tasks, links, everything for you. It's fantastic, right? Next stage this year is we want to do what Marc just mentioned is the grounding. So ground knowledge creation and surfacing. So that's the item where we trained it for the PACE grid. We gave it the PACE framework and it becomes grounded in that. You'll be able to ground it in content in method grid or document you feed it, essentially. And then that works with the content generation.
If we, so one of the issues we've had with method grid and trying to get people using it the right way, it's static documents, so like the dead version of the document. So we come around the idea of making sure it's linked to the SharePoint. So it's always, will the grounding take on board the SharePoint link?
So initially it's going to be uploading documents, but we do want to be able to point it at a folder of SharePoint documents, so you don't have to keep doing it one by one. We want to just go, right, there's the folder, ingest all of that. So it's probably stage 1, no, but stage 2, yes. Yeah. So then once we've got that will then go into the chat. You can then talk to a grid, so you can ask it questions, and it will give you the answers from the knowledge in the grid, and crucially from this source grounding as well. So then the chat module you'll have in method grid will be grounded on your knowledge and give you the answers that your team want, and you can take away some of that lack of confidence in what the output is because you've grounded it yourself. And then even more exciting, this is just tell me things, right, about this grid. It's getting insights from the grid. So I think in the demo and some of the ones we've shown, it's make me a table of all the tasks that are currently ragged red in this grid, and it will just output it. So we go from a position where at the moment you have to go into a table, you'd filter the table, you get there in the end, right? But with this tool you can just ask it and it will return it. Much quicker. And then the final one is our plans for lessons learned and project leap, which is the timely capture. But we've got a couple of slides before we introduce that, so we can kind of explain the concept of that first.
So Julie, a very quick one on the surfacing. So you can chat with it. Could you say, provide me with a template for, and it give you the link to a template that you've got in a grid, or is it just text?
It would be able to, yeah.
Yeah. The demo we've got doesn't do that, but it absolutely could. There's no reason.
Yeah, we could have it say, what's the source? I could say this element, or this template document.
I want a financial template for projects, it just gives you...
Yeah, it would just give you that.
Navigate through the grid stuff.
Yeah. It actually can say to you, it's in this element, here's a link. Yeah.
So let me just, so that's the demo. So I'm going to do another thing on Slido. I mean, if you don't want to type into Slido, just keep it in your head and we'll just keep the whole discussion going, right? But if you flash, there's like an ideas thing. So as we go through the demos, we're crucially, it's not just method grid, right? Any ideas for the use of AI, you can type them into there and we can kind of thumbs up, thumbs down them and keep a record of any ideas that we have as we're going along. But, keep them coming up verbally as well. So,
My backup.
Yeah, so then it's over to see some of these demos.
So yeah, while I'm going through these demos, have a think about those, maybe write some ideas down.
Just a quick question on the AI model.
Yeah.
If you've got a very small instance, and you're not a big company, are we able to put in our own, how would we load up our own sort of AI in it, or do we have to come back to you guys to get a professional services thing to load it in my own content, let's say?
For using your own content or using your own model?
No, content, Mark, come on, you bet me.
So, yeah, the interface we're building for source grounding is you will have your own library that you upload all the resources you want, and then when you come to build the grid, you want to invoke the AI, you can specify what sources you want to use. So it's kind of, I did a agile food and it was like, oh, we want to use safe, God knows why. And I was like, okay, fine, great. So we'll just direct and point it at that, so all context grounded on that. But then we're a hybrid of, we want a kind of Reba, CIOB kind of merge. But how do we build a model to do that? So it's just being able to pick different models. But we don't want any hooks, so it'd be more that you pick the resources that are relevant to you and then off you go.
We have the user interface this stuff.
Speaking of which... Yeah, this is exactly what we're talking about.
Is that there now?
This is on our sort of testing servers before it gets to production. It's not quite production yet. But yeah, this was the idea of exactly what we were just talking about. Yeah, of you can upload your own documents, import a URL of a website that it can use. In the future, use SharePoint folder. There's a couple of other things as well about the tone, so you can have a consistent tone throughout all of your content. But yeah, that's the idea through this one. Then you can enable it, disable it. There's this idea of strength, so sort of how much should it use certain sources versus other ones. So maybe you've got something that use this if you can, but if there's nothing in there, use this one, but only if there's nothing in the first one. That sort of idea. So you can sort of weight how important each of your documents are. So that's the basic user interface for that. I'll show you it. I'll show you it working. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to start creating an element, just as an example for creating an issue management plan. I'm going to create two different content areas. I'll do it once without using the sources in that library that we've uploaded. So this is exactly as it would work in the platform currently. So this is what you would see in the platform now. This is live, this is in production. So I'm just going to ask it to write a bullet point list of steps for creating an issue management plan. And I've unticked this, so it's not going to use the sources I've told it to. It's just going to use its generic knowledge that the model has. And there we go. So that's come back. It's written those steps for creating an issue management plan, evaluate the project scope and identify potential risks. That all sounds very good. Now, one of the documents that we've uploaded to this particular test organization is this project management method. And on page 99 of this, there are actually steps for creating an issue management plan. So if this is, we've identified this as a document that we use in our organization, obviously if I'm building out content in MethodGrid, I'd rather actually use the knowledge that's already in our organization rather than coming up with something new. So I'm going to do the exact same thing again. But this time I'm going to tell it to use the sources that our organization has. So I'm going to keep that ticked. I'm going to click generate. And hopefully what we're about to see is a list of steps that are exactly the same as the ones in the document. There we go. So you can see it's different. Check there's a pre-existing issue management process at the organization level. I'll put these side by side so we can check if they are the same. Check there's a pre-existing management, check if there's a pre-existing issue management process, tailor the issue management plan, tailor the issue management, so you can see it's found the knowledge in the document, and instead of giving us a generic answer, it's actually used the answer that we already have in that document. I'll show you it again actually, because it's kind of just done a copy and paste, which is fine, and that might be what you want. But just to show you that it can be a bit more interesting than that. It can find the knowledge and then do something with it rather than just a simple copy and paste. So let's say, same thing again, we want to steps for creating an issue management plan. Let's say, dumb it down to make it easier to understand. So now what it is hopefully going to do, it's going to find the same information again in that document, but instead of just doing a copy and paste, it's going to edit it a bit, make it a bit simpler to understand, simplify the language of it a bit, which I think a really good use case for this sort of thing is if it's a particularly technical document and you want to explain it to people who aren't experts. So here we go. Check if there's already a process for managing. I mean, it wasn't that complicated to begin with, so there's only so much you can dumb it down. But you can see it has reworded it. It's worded it in a sort of simpler way. Like I said, use case for that is if it's a particularly technical thing that you want to, or you could do anything with it. You could do write these steps, translate them into French, write these steps, whatever. Give us an example for each one, whatever you want to do. So that's a quick demo of that. The idea with this, as Jody said, would be that this library you've got of all your organization's knowledge, it wouldn't just be used here, it'd be used in this chat interface. You could search for certain things within it, all that sort of stuff. Any questions about this one before I move on to the next demo?
Development idea, but I don't know how difficult it is. If I did a point in time, say March, did a whole bunch of AI types of stuff from the source, not the source file, sorry, and then we were to go in November time and say, update, could everything be re-updated on a grid? That might be a bit much, but I'm just thinking, so then if the documents have
I've got with the way this is currently implemented, no, but certainly it'd be possible if we saved what prompt you used to regenerate. That would definitely be something that would be doable, and I think we should make a note of. I think it's a great idea.
You always keep the knowledge base up to date then.
I think it's a great idea. Thanks for coming.
And Mark, the resource information documents you upload, are they just visible through your own personal account and not available wider through MetaGrid?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're just, you have complete control over them. They don't go anywhere outside your organization. Absolutely. And again, to go back to the point about model training, we're not fine-tuning or training a model with that information, so it's not in the parameters, it can't leak out anywhere. There's absolutely no danger of that sort of thing at all. Okay, I'll move on to the next demo. So the next one is, not slides, okay. So this is a similar sort of thing of building out an element using AI, and the way we have that in the platform at the minute is based on templates. So you create a template, and then you tell the AI to use a certain template, and it builds out your content using that template, which is great. But what we've kind of found, I think, and Pip, maybe you can sort of speak to this a bit, once you've got a few good templates, you can really quickly build things out, but getting the templates in the first place can be a bit of a challenge, maybe?
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
That's fair, yeah, that's fair.
And so what I'm about to trying to address is that kind of initial blank page. I don't have anything. How do I get going with kind of building some stuff out? So what we're going to do is I'm going to start creating an element. Let's call it project brief. And I'm going to click this shiny new button here. And this little chatbot is going to start talking to me. And it's going to say, it looks like you're building an element. Would you like some help? So just very simple to give you the idea of that it can make things for us. I'm just going to say, create a content area titled, what am I going to call it? I've made some notes for what I was going to do for this. Purpose of a project brief with content coming soon. So just that simple example, you'll see, hopefully, that it can start, we can tell to do stuff, and it'll actually do. So there we go. It's created that content area for us. Now, that by itself isn't particularly interesting, because why would you use AI for that? You could just click on the buttons and it'd be quicker. So next thing I'm going to show you, you can update stuff that already works. So I'll say to it, I accidentally pressed enter and now I've ruined everything. Apologies, I'm going to start this demo again. Pretend that never happened and I've just started.
Hallucination.
Yes, exactly. Okay. Hang on a sec. That was the right one. Okay. I am building an element. Okay. Okay, so create an area called purpose of project brief with content coming soon. Okay, so that's going to create us a content area. But the next point is, instead of just telling it, so it can do things when you directly tell it to do, you can also ask it to generate some of the content for you in the same way as we have in the other interface. So the next thing I'm going to say to it, which I'm going to start typing while it's doing it, is update that content area to include a short description of the purpose of a project brief. And we see it can interact with the element, with the things that already exist. So it is now hopefully going to actually write some content for us, and it's going to populate that content area with the purpose of a project brief. There we go. So it's come back and it's written us some content in there, so you can see you can ask it to fill in the stuff for you. Next thing I'm going to show, we can also, because it has access to that element, it knows what's in there, we can ask it to create new content based on what's already there. So I'm going to say create another area called purpose of project brief, and I'm doing this because I find it hilarious. Explain for 5-year-olds. That explains that content for a 5-year-old. So hopefully what that's going to do now, it's going to create as a second content area, which is going to have the same sort of stuff. It knows what is already in there, but it's going to really dumb it down and explain it to a 5-year-old. So there we go. Think of a project brief like a storybook that tells you what you want to build, like a treehouse. It tells us what we need, who will help, and the steps to make it. This way everyone can understand and help make our treehouse the best it can be. It's the quality content you were hoping for today. Okay, so next thing. So you can see we can ask it to do stuff, we can tell it exactly what we want, or we can ask it to fill in the content for us, we can ask it to take existing content, create new content based on that. But I think where the most powerful bit of this comes in, and this is to the point about, you're staring at a blank page, how do you get started with building something out? I'm going to now say, I want to create another content area called guidelines for creating a project brief. But before we create it, I'd like to brainstorm. Could you start by writing 3 bullet points? So rather than just diving in, I don't really know what I want this content area to say yet. I don't really know how to get started, so I'm going to ask it to start drafting it for me. I don't want it to create it yet, I just want to have a bit of a conversation about it, a bit of back and forth, a bit of a brainstorm before we actually create the content. So I'm going to ask it to start off by just drafting 3 bullet points for me. So here we go, to come back with some. So it said, define clear objectives, outline scope constraints, identify key stakeholders, that's all fine. Let's say I've read that and I thought, yeah, that's all good, but I'd also like something else in, so I'll say, I want something about project timeline in there. Could you draft a bullet point for that? And this conversation could go on as long as you want it to go on for. You could say, actually, could you take some of this out? Could you edit this bit? Could you add this bit in? Could you expand on this a little bit? For the purpose of the demo, rather than going on indefinitely, after it says that, I'm just going to ask it to create it based on the conversation we've just had.
Is it on your roadmap to have the actual conversation rather than type it?
Yes. Yeah. We did have, I'll admit, a slightly gimmicky demo a while ago of talking to the AI. So absolutely, I can see an absolute, for a lot of people, I think typing this would take quite a long time, and it'd be a lot easier to just be able to talk. So absolutely, that's something we've talked about.
Star Trek mode.
Star Trek mode was that demo, yeah.
But for, you said it was gimmicky, but we were like, for people with accessibility challenges,
Yeah. I mean, the demo I created was gimmicky. I think the idea is great. It just needed a lot more refinements than the sort of demo I threw together.
Get prepared for, it's not too far off.
Yeah.
Because natural language is moving so quickly, it will be, okay, computer can do X, can do Y. You know, it's like, just can't be bothered to do it.
Yeah. So, okay, like I said, that conversation could go on for a lot longer. You could do a lot more editing, a lot more brainstorming. But for now, I've just said, great, could you create that content area, please? So hopefully, it's now going to create that content area for guidelines with those 4 points we just discussed. So there we go. It's done it, but it's formatted it a bit weirdly. I know why it's done that. There's a difference in the demo between how we render the chat and how we render the elements. I'm going to ask it to fix it for us. Obviously, in the real production version, this isn't something you would have to do. It would do this automatically, but I'm just going to ask it to fix it for us. And I mean, it's a good example of when it's created the content area for you. If the formatting or anything you don't like about it, you can just go and say, actually, could you change this for me, please? And it'll do it. So hopefully, it'll come back and fix the formatting of that for us now. It's having a think.
I think, Mark, on this one, when we build playbooks using AI really, really quickly, it's when I think when we did Steve's offshore one, a lot of it came from National Grid. That's what Steve was saying, but can we just tweak this and tweak that, we need to change that, and it's just having the ability to quickly go, okay, quickly refine that answer, yeah, we're happy with that, move on, and it's just trying to train, sometimes you have to train slightly to get a much richer response, or much kind of, that feels not the language we use, we want it to feel more SSE, or we want it to feel more, we don't say those words, we say these, it's just being able to tweak it quite quickly for that kind of...
Yeah, I think that's sort of the key thing about this is that often writing stuff with AI, it's an iterative process. So how do we make that as easy as possible? Okay, so we've got all our content. Let's say I'm happy with that. Now, to the point I said at the beginning, with our existing template system, one of the things with that, it's great when you have the template, but getting to that point can be difficult. So what I'm going to do now, I've had this conversation, I've built out this element. Let's say I'm happy with the element. I'm now going to say, could you save this element as a template? And let's say call it deliverable. So now what it's going to do, it's going to save that element structure as a template, and it's also, because it's been built, having the whole conversation, it kind of knows how to build this element from the conversation we've just had. So it's going to save that as, there we go, it's been successfully saved as a template. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a new element, and I'm going to call it, let's say, risk management plan. So something completely different. And I'm going to open up the AI templates. I can see there the deliverable template that has now been saved. That's the one we just asked the AI to save. So if I select that, it's going to build some content based on the conversation we just had, but for a totally different thing. So the conversation we had was all about a project brief, but because it saved that conversation as a template, it can apply that same conversation, that same output we had to something totally different, like a risk management plan. So you can see it's come back with the same Same content areas, guidelines, creating a risk management plan, identify potential risks, assess the likelihood and impact of each risk. So it's tuned the conversation we just had to be about something else. Similarly, it's got the purpose explained to a 5-year-old. So you start to see sometimes when you're creating a template, it can feel a bit abstract because it's not about a concrete example, whereas this way we had a concrete conversation about something specific, i.e. a project brief, saved the abstract template from that, and then that allowed us to apply that template and that conversation to something else. Any questions about that one?
Just go to the whole hog and say, create me an element with the relevant content areas.
I think that's, yeah, I think that is where we would like to go with it, definitely.
What's the other one? Create me a grid.
Yeah, create a grid is the sort of ultimate.
Project, man.
Is the next one.
Yeah, that's sort of the ultimate there.
I can retire then, for sure.
Any other questions?
Yeah, exactly.
And deliver it for me.
Could you use this and grid source together so you could?
Yes. So in this demo, they're not connected, but absolutely, yes, that would be the idea. Yeah. So you could as part of the conversation say use these files, use this website, use whatever.
Or use practice. Or,
Yeah, absolutely. Great. If no more questions, I'll move on to the next one.
Sorry, Mark, it's great. The source information, is it purely written format, or can you load videos and load from that?
So currently it's just words. Definitely it could be videos and things like that. I mean, from a technical point of view, all that would really happen is you'd turn the video into a transcript, and then it would treat it essentially the same from that point on. It's just like a pre-processing step. So technically, it's definitely possible. I think at some point we would add it. It might not make the first release, but at some point, yeah.
Mark, can you get it to suggest templates as well from your source? So if you're pointing it at, let's say, kind of a...
Currently, no. Absolutely, it could be possible. It could have access to what templates you have, and if you said to it, I want to create an element for X, what template would be good? And it might say, well, you've got a template for deliverables. Do you want to use that? Yeah, that's definitely something that could be possible. Okay, so nothing more. I will move on to the next one. So this is going to be about getting insights from the grid. So we're going to be talking to the grid and trying to get some information out of it. In fact, I'll ask it something. I'll ask it something simple to start with. So how many elements are in this grid? Let's start with the basics. Now this one, I just saw on the roadmap, is kind of the furthest one into the future, and so the prototype is in the earliest stages. So if any of these are going to embarrass me in front of a room full of people, it's going to be this one. One of the things that you will see is that it can sometimes take quite a long time to figure out the answers to some of these questions. So I am going to talk about other stuff while it's doing its thing, otherwise we'll just be staring at the screen for like 2 minutes. Here we go. The grid contains 16 elements. Great. So it can answer us some basic questions. So let's do the example Jody said before about creating a table. Create a table showing how many elements each person has assigned. So hopefully that's going to come back with a table of each person in the grid and how many elements are assigned to each of them. While it's doing that, I will quickly say, you will have noticed that when I started this conversation in this grid, I did it in the exact same way as when I started the conversation when building an element. I just clicked on that button at the side. The AI, it knows what I'm doing when I click the button. It knows what I've just been doing. So in the first conversation, I had an element I started editing, I renamed the element, and when I started the conversation, it immediately said to me, it looks like you're building an element, would you like some help? Whereas in this case, because I opened the grid and didn't do anything, it just gave me a very generic, is there anything I can help you with? When I was talking before about different types of models and what we use them for, and I said that often what you'll see in AI systems is the initial thing, there's like a controller model that decides where the request should go. That's exactly what's happening here. So it's got back to us, it's made us a table showing everyone in the grid, how many things they've got assigned to them. So I've got 4 elements, Tom's got 3, Jodie's got 2. And let's say I want to know a bit more information about how each of those is going. So I'll just say, could you break that data down by element rag? And hopefully that is going to come back with another table that's that data broken down by the rag of each element that we've all got assigned to us. But what I was saying, so when we start this conversation, when we open this AI chat, the first thing that happens is that controller model. That sort of knows about the context. It knows what our first message is, what we initially start talking about, what we're doing, and who we are. And that then decides which of our AI models you should be having that conversation with. So this conversation is happening with a different AI model than the other one was happening with. From an interface point of view, it looks like they're exactly the same, but they're actually different. They're specialized to do different things. But just to make the interface a lot smoother, to make it make a lot more sense, you kind of start the conversation in the same way, and the system figures out which model you should be talking to. You can also switch models between conversation, mid-conversation. If you go off and want to do something else, it can then sort of step in at that point and go, oh, okay, I'm going to direct this conversation to this other model now because it's better to handle. It's better handling this sort of conversation.
I think that the power of this interface is building models for write me the highlight report. Quickly look at the grid, or tell me which grids I need to worry about. Which ones haven't been accessed, which ones haven't been updated, or where are significant delays been. It's essentially building models for particular use cases for delivery that are harnessing the data off the platform. And this is the kind of efficiency productivity hack.
And could you get to create a widget off the back of that from your dashboard?
I think that's the kind of evolution next step. Okay, can you throw it into can you have a chat? Well, either can you throw it into Word doc or PowerPoint, or can you interact with Copilot? I think it's that's where we see it going. But
yeah.
We'll build and train specific models for particular use cases that are high value for organisations that do things.
Yeah.
Significantly reduces the amount of code we have to write, because essentially the model is doing most of the thinking for us.
Yeah, so this has come back to us now. You can see it's got a table of that same data broken down by rag. So I've got one of each colour. Jodie's are both green. He's doing well. So now I'm going to say, sort of to that point.
So, Mark, quick one for you. Could you assign that rag now? So Tom had one that was in. Would it?
I'll get to that in a minute. So now I'm going to say, create a stacked bar chart. And hopefully that is going to do exactly that. It's going to come back. It's going to create us a bar chart showing that data. So what was the conversation before? We've got about a minute to fill if you want to carry on.
Is that how it takes? Yeah, but I think I think a lot of organisations are working out how to build value through AI. And it's kind of, yes, there are, I mean, for us, content development took us from 6 months to a kind of 4 to 5 week conversation in terms of building playbooks for organisations. And the next hack is, for us, is, okay, how do we, I've got to assign, some information to assign, I've got to assign all these activities to the project manager, or I've got to go and chase every task that's out of date. And it's kind of like, yes, you can, but that's like go and tick and nudge, go and interact. It's kind of like computer, you know it. Go and find it out. And it's kind of, that's where the efficiency, productivity hack is. Go and nudge everyone that's late on task, or quickly tell me which projects I need to really focus on. It's kind of that interface at different levels. By project manager, it does stuff for me. The exec, the sponsor, I ask it questions. It looks at a broader data set and comes back and says, out of all the grids or all the projects you've got going, this one looks failed. It's never been updated. It's not, users aren't using it. It's kind of okay. Go and tell me that's what kind of what I need to focus on.
I've done this probably about 20 times, including twice this morning, to check it worked, and it worked every time. And so of course the one time it has actually done it, but it's formatted it. You can see it. It's in here. That is actually the image of the bar chart, all of that massive text. but it's just output in a really weird format. So I've asked it to do it again without the text to see if it does it properly.
Mark, so we use the comment field to sort of just create summaries of where each of those tasks are. If you were to ask the question, could you give me a summary report or update over the last 7 days, would it be able to interrogate and draw down that data?
I think so. From your comments and things, I mean, in this demo it doesn't, but absolutely it could. There's no reason why not to.
Something that becomes sentiment analysis.
Yeah.
Like looking at sentiment analysis on comments and saying, look, which projects do I need to worry about? And if it looks and analyses the comments left on the platform, it's like, by the way, what is going on here doesn't feel healthy. You should go and have a look at this. It's kind of that's probably a bit of AI, Big Brother, but essentially it's using the same data set to pinpoint you and focus attention.
Could you commit any of those queries into the actual dashboard functionality so that you can embed those queries and refresh them?
That I think is the kind of next step, is integrating this chat thing with the existing sort of dashboard filters, which would definitely be doable. It doesn't work in this demo, but definitely would. You can see I'm desperately trying to just get it to output the image without all the nonsense. We'll see if it does it. But you're just going to have to believe me that this absolutely can draw a graph based on the data.
Hallucinations.
Yeah.
Can I downgrade to a 1? Trust me.
If it doesn't work this time, I'll move on. But just trust me, a bar chart would have come up showing the data and it'd have been great. But the next thing I'm going to show is to the question there. Yes, you can also then tell it to do things with that data. You can tell it to update a RAG or whatever it is you want to do. So when it comes back, hopefully with a bar chart, I'll show you that next.
So can you ask it to group assign things?
Yes. In fact, I'll do that. I'll show you that working. Not what I wanted.
I'll go back to the point earlier on of having to mass assign from the newly current grid. You'd be able to just ask it, say, assign all the elements labeled X to this person, and it will do it.
Right, I'm going to try and show this as an image. That's not going to work, is it? I promise you that is an image. Should I put this in here? There we go. Hey. So it kept outputting it as a weird format in text rather than an image, but that is the actual data. You can see it can do it. So yeah, there we go. That's the data of the table shown, broken down by RAG. No idea why it's made all the colours green instead of red, amber and green. It also did it in the correct colours when I did this morning. But here we are. Anyway, you get the point. You can ask it some data. You can drill down to sort of segment the data however you want. You can ask it to produce a chart for you, and it might. So the next thing, you can then start to ask it to do things for you. So we had the RAG data above. So let's say the red elements I'm concerned about, and I want to assign them to someone else. Jody's got 2 green elements. He's doing well, so I'm going to assign them all to Jody. Say, could you assign all the red elements to Jody? And hopefully, although I am losing confidence in it, it is now going to assign all of the red elements to Jody. But yeah, I mean, this could be, I think the data segmentation is the real sort of power of this sort of thing, because doing like really specific data segmentation through a UI is a bit of a nightmare, no matter how good the UI is. Being able to just do it really quickly in language is I think the real power of this sort of thing.
Here's a question, just as we're going through all this, it's becoming very feature rich. And people learning to do this, and if they're not doing it all the time, there's a potential that it becomes less intuitive. Stuff from skills field, like people don't use project all the time. They don't use things, and you're not there yet, by along with it. I'm just thinking, as you're putting more and more and more and more of this in, is that then we can end up with a bunch of people who are going to have to be super users, and then your average user. I'm just wary of that as we go through and build it out. But right now we're not there, but I just have that small niggle back in my very old brain.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's absolutely a skill to using it, and yeah,
I mean,
you
not
need
just
to
the
learn.
AI, I mean the whole method grid. Let's say.
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
mean AI piece, Mark. I mean the whole capability. That's,
Yeah.
It's the controls on it, isn't it? Because like you just done that. It's like, where was the audit trail on that? Who just assigned everything to me?
So yeah, so Jody, you can see it's come back and said yeah. You can see in the actual elements, Jody's face is now there. So it has actually assigned all the red ones back to Jody. I think that's a great point about, you potentially can do a lot of powerful things with that. And to the point earlier about can we have a little pop up of, are you sure you want to do this? Maybe. But what I will say is everything that happens through the AI is it has the same impact, the same status on the system as things you've done manually yourself. So if I open up, give me a sec. So this is our email thing we have. So you can see that when I did that, even though I triggered it through the AI, it has actually sent an email out to Jody to give him a notification to tell him it's happened, as if I'd done it myself manually. Similarly, in terms of auditing things, if I open up the activity log, you can see it in there as well, in exactly the same way as if I'd gone through and clicked on all the elements myself. So it all gets tracked. Everything that would get triggered by me doing it myself through the interface also gets triggered doing it through the AI as well. I think because of how much power you could have with it, if you said assign everything to this one person, we'd have to have some sort of safeguard of, are you sure you want to do this? Or here's what you're about to do. Maybe check it before we do it, and undo things like that. Yeah. But yeah, you can see it does, it picks it up, it all gets audited, all that sort of stuff. Any questions on any of this? No? Okay, cool. I will move on to the last one, which is about LEAP. So anyone who's not aware of what Project LEAP is, it's our kind of project around lessons learned in major projects. The idea being that, when we get to the end of a project, generally what tends to happen is we all sit down, we all have a meeting, we discuss what went well, what went badly, what we should remember in the future, and then we all write it down in a document, and no one ever looks at it again, and we have the same conversation again in a year. So the idea is how do we improve that? How do we potentially use AI to improve the quality of lessons? And there's a bunch of different features for this that we're working on, from how do you recognise the correct time to record a lesson rather than just at the end of a project? When's the best time to surface a lesson? There's a discussion earlier about when someone is in a certain location, could that be a trigger for surfacing a lesson? But what this demo is going to focus on is how do you improve the quality of a lesson as it's recorded. I think what a lot of people find often when people are given a form and said what lessons can be learned from this, what went well, they just input very generic, not particularly helpful things. So you just end up with this massive lesson repository of not particularly insightful stuff that you can't really do much with. We did record a video of this not too long ago, so you might have seen this already. But I'm going to do a sort of fictional example of recording a lesson for a rail project. So I've opened up the AI system again. I'm going to say I want to record a lesson for this project. And as I said before about that initial sort of controller model, decides which of the different models we should talk to. This is going to do exactly the same thing. We've started talking about recording a lesson, so it's directed us to our lessons learned model rather than the same model we were talking to before. So it's asking me about a challenge that was faced or overcome in the project. So I'm going to say there were incompatibilities. Yes. Between the new system and the old infrastructure. In fact, existing infrastructure. Structure. I spelled existing wrong. Now, I'm sort of intentionally not giving it a lot of details. I'm sort of giving it, a really sort of vague message, because the whole point of this is it shouldn't accept my vague, low-quality lesson, because we don't want to record that. That's the sort of thing you might see if I was filling in, a Google form about this. But we wanted to ask me some follow-up questions, get some more detail about it, make it a bit more actionable. So it's saying, I see there were compatibility issues. Could you elaborate on the specific compatibilities? Were they technical, process, or a different kind of issue? So I'm just going to say it was due to the age. Existing, I can't type, infrastructure.
Do you have the correct spelling mistake?
Probably not, actually. It would probably get what I was saying if I didn't. So yeah, you'll see the idea. It's going to keep asking me more and more questions to get more and more specific, so that the lesson we end up with is a lot more actionable. Can you tell me more about the... So I'm going to say it was... I'm slightly making this up, to be honest, due to the differences in protocols. And as the conversation goes on, it'll start asking me specific questions to make any lesson that we end up recording a lot more actionable, so that we can actually do something with the lesson in a future project. By the way, I'm aware of what time it is, so I don't know. If you want me to move on at any point, please do say. So it's asking me now what actions were taken to address the issue, who was involved in taking the actions, and at what stage. So I will say we called in electrical specialists, but only once the project has started. We should have done it earlier.
The model, obviously you're being incredibly vague, but the model is basically whatever you input, it's checking the characteristics, does it meet the quality criteria, and then it's hunting down people to get that criteria.
Yeah, so I'm sort of intentionally not giving it all of the information it needs. I'm not giving it a high quality lesson to show that it's going to just keep asking me questions until I do. It's not going to let me save the lesson. In fact, when I was demoing this internally, I literally just said to it, I can't be bothered, can I just save it as it is? And it didn't let me. It said it refused to save it. And then it started explaining to me why it was important to give more details and that sort of thing. So now it's asking me, so here you go, can you tell me exactly what stage was this done? Was it at the strategic development, project selection, project design? Now what's interesting here, those are actually phases that are in this grid. So it knows about the grid that I'm in, it knows about the different phases. So when it's asking me what phase it was in, it asked me, I think, twice, and I didn't answer the question. I just ignored the question. But rather than accepting me ignoring the question, it started asking me again. I still ignored it. So it started giving me specific examples from the grid to say, was it this, was it this? To really sort of help me record the lesson properly. So I'll say it was during project delivery, but it should have been done during, let's say, strategic development. So let's say that. So yeah, you can see, because I didn't give it a very good answer, it just kept asking until I did. And then when I kept refusing, it started giving me suggestions for what the answer might be based on its knowledge of the project.
Question. Will it reach a level of intelligence to realise what's value adding and what isn't?
I mean, that would be the ideal, yes, is that it can, even once it's saved the lesson, it can then filter out, these are the really good, high-quality lessons, these are the ones that are a bit generic.
More to the point.
Yeah.
Don't waste your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Learn, move on.
Yeah, because I think
Don't
that's...
use baselines.
Yeah, I think that's the big problem that exists with lessons learned as it's currently done is there's so much low-quality lessons that it's like, we'd be better off without them kind of thing.
the application of this is, you know, it can be, I need to write a hazard, I need to write a risk, I need to write a requirement. Again, it's trying to say, well, look, we've codified what the quality requirements are for it, so if you want me to capture that and add it to a different data source, inject it, put it either in SharePoint lists or throw it independently, it's essentially saying, look, I only want to put quality in. The system is saying, well, you haven't met the criteria for it, so I'm going to ask you and ask you and ask you to get it. So LEAP for us is quite important. Obviously, lessons learned is the main application, but actually when you think about what the system is actually doing, like the kind of model conversation, it's actually much broader than saying, actually, can I get the requirements, can I get the risks? It's looked at my project, understands hazards, it's looked at previous hazards, and it's saying, look, tell me about other hazards, these are the ones I recommend. It's much more powerful. LEAP is probably just the lessons learned is the first application.
Sure, this project for it.
Well, I think it'll a lot of the like the P3 insurance lot are already trying to work on an AI-driven assurance model, which is much broader. Greyfly, I think the company that do really well, ingesting a lot of financial data, project data, quality data, and it's starting to build a predictability, like AI predictability model. That's where I think it will go. More data and more analytics.
Yeah, so you can see here, it's kind of started to wrap the conversation up a little bit. It's kind of said, let's distill the key lesson here. It seems that involving electrical specialists early in the strategic development phase allows for better planning that accommodates infrastructure limitations and ensures minimal service disruption. So it's kind of started to distill, based on the whole conversation, what the actual key lesson is. And then it's asked me a bit more information that I'm just going to give it. Feel free to keep talking while I'm having this conversation with the AI.
I suppose the other aspect of LEAP that we haven't shown you, I think previously we were showing where, Marc, where you're interacting with an element on the playbook, and it will then start to push lessons to you as you're, based on your role and what you're doing, and say, by the way, I know this about your project, this has happened before, this is my recommendation, based off accessing lessons learned. Do you want to accept it? And add that to either a checklist, a control list. And again, probably what Marc was saying is it's the kind of not human learned behaviour as well, and saying, is that a good recommendation? Because then the system becomes, actually this lesson, when we push it and make this recommendation at this point in the playbook, that was valuable, and 10 users out of 20 accepted. And that's, for us, it's the first point where you actually can evidence that lessons learned are being surfaced and are actually being applied. Because at the moment now, it's probably, Network Rails is like a 5,000 big SharePoint list, and it's kind of, well, how could we track that list is actually being used and evidence? How many recommendations have we made? How many have been accepted? Because that's really then demonstrating the value of that asset to the organisation as a usable resource. But a big long list is a big long list where if we can try and teach AI to say actually when is the right time to recommend it, to make that lesson catchable is the big focus on it.
Yeah, so you can see it's kind of it's happy now with how much detail I've given it. So it's kind of distilled this to project managers conduct an early review of existing infrastructure conditions and compatibility with new systems during the strategic development phase. If there are any potential compatibility issues due to the age or technology of the existing infrastructure, they consider involving electrical specialists immediately to devise a phased implementation plan. So you can see that's a lot more, there's a lot more there, there's a lot more detail, it's a lot more actionable than what I initially said of just the incompatibilities. So you can see that's kind of the idea, and then it's asked me if I wanted to save it, so I've said, yes, save that please. So indeed saved it to our lessons learned repository, and as Pip was just talking about, the idea would be that in the future, that lesson would then be surfaced to the relevant person at the relevant time. So, and this is the bit of the demo that, 50-50 whether or not it works, but let's find out. I'm going to clone this project. So let's say in the future, it's a year into the future, we're working on a different project that I'm going to call similar project. And as I'm working on stuff, I get to the strategic deployment phase, which is the phase we were just talking about, that relevant element was relevant for. And when I'm here, you can see nothing happens. However, if I go as logged in as a different person, and I go to the strategic development phase of this new similar project, hopefully, there we go, we got a little pop-up saying there was a previously recorded lesson relevant to the content that you're viewing. Now, the reason that didn't happen is because, for the first time, because I'm logged in as me, and I'm not a project manager, and that lesson was only relevant to project managers, based on that conversation. Whereas when I log in as Jody, he is a project manager, so when he goes to the relevant part of a different project, he gets a little prompt because it's relevant to him, it's not relevant to me. Hopefully that gives you some sort of idea of what we're building behind the idea of improving the quality of lessons as they're recorded, and a bit of a glimpse. Obviously there's a lot more to how we surface lessons and how we decide when is the best time and who's the best person to surface them to, but you can sort of get a bit of an idea of where we're going with that as well. Any?
I think another use case that sort of came out was engineering alerts. Network Realm did, was it Easton's plan was, look, how do I get an engineering alert? This thing we've procured doesn't actually work. How can I quickly cascade that and get that out to all the other design engineers as a rapid response? So there's kind of other applications out there as well.
Any questions about any of that? We've got some more slides to go back to, if not. Okay, great.
So just how repetitive are the lessons? So if you get that pop-up once and you tell it to clear off or whatever, is that it gone? Does it appear?
I think that's a.
Or is that what you're trying to think about?
I'll move on with the slides because I'm one of them. I think is relevant to that sort of thing. Of, I think the more we've talked about this, the more we've kind of talked about this whole project, the more we've kind of realised there's a huge psychological aspect to it as well. And one of them is around that of, you know, we don't want to be in a situation where we're constantly spamming people with, oh, here's a lesson that's relevant, because people just start ignoring them. So it needs to be surfaced at a time when, you know, it is truly going to be valuable. So one of the things we've talked about, and I'm not sure if we have, so these are all the different kind of aspects of this whole project. I've just talked about improving the quality of a lesson as you ingest it. The other aspects are, when is the best time to capture a lesson? You know, we talked before when we were talking about the Gantt of if we can figure out anomalies based on scheduling data. So if you've got a whole bunch of projects and, you know, a certain stage usually takes 10 weeks, whereas you've managed to do it in half that time, maybe that's a little trigger that can say, is there a lesson here that you could share with other people for what went well? So when's the best time to learn a lesson? How do we improve the quality of the lesson as it gets captured? That's what I've been talking about now. How do we kind of categorize using natural language processing, categorize those lessons to make them searchable if someone wanted to? And then how do we retrieve them? When's the best time to prompt someone to say, there's a lesson relevant to what you're doing that is relevant to you? Yeah, so this is all the different aspects, and you can see number 7 there is exactly to what we were just talking about, is incorporating human feedback into this whole loop. So when someone gets presented with a lesson, they could be asked to give feedback of how relevant actually is this to you. And, you know, it could be, you've just distracted me from something important with something totally irrelevant, why have you done this? All the way up to, oh, you've just saved the project. So that would be, hopefully then would be incorporated back into the model so it starts to learn, it gets better at supplying relevant lessons to relevant people. So yeah, the idea is that, I think this was an interesting discussion we had last time we were talking about this Project Leap, was the ultimate goal of all of this, the ultimate goal of a lesson is that you update your process. So, you know, you get a little prompt saying, here's a lesson. Well, that's great, but then the same problem is going to happen again unless it's embedded into your process. So you update your grid, and then the next time someone comes along, they don't need the prompt because it's been fixed. It's been embedded in your process. They follow the process. They don't need the lesson anymore. The lesson can be retired because we have actually learned it. That's the ultimate goal of all of this. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about Leap in a minute, about getting involved, because the sort of ultimate of talking about all of this is we want people to be involved in some of this, in Leap especially, but also in any other AI research we've got going on. So these are some of the other things we've got. I'm not going to go into detail on any of them. We are an industry partner on a project, a strategic research innovative called Just Now, which is around using AI for transitioning to net zero. Anyone interested in that, wanting to get involved, please do speak to us. It's in the very, very early stages, but absolutely people can get involved. In terms of writing research, and this is obviously getting into the more technical end of it, but within organisations that have R&D departments, any collaboration that anyone would be interested in there, please do get in touch with us. We are interested in writing research papers. That is one we have written recently in collaboration with people at Durham Uni. We've got some stuff going on with Bath as well, Bath Uni, with one of their, it's called the Art AI organisation. So again, with all this, please do get involved. AI services that we can offer. Pip, I don't know if you want to talk some more about this. I think we've got a slide for it if you want to.
Yeah, so I think, obviously, like I said, the design business around what we see that's going to be useful. Ooh, hello. So obviously, we'll continue with the kind of trying to do more briefings, knowledge sharing on the kind of AI topic. One of those aspects is, which comes out in the next couple of weeks, is the ISO standard for AI. So organisations, unfortunately, just like you'll have ISO 9001, you're going to have to start demonstrating compliance to 42,001. We're going to build a playbook that allows you to kind of self-certify yourself that, and we're working with the authors of ISO 42001 to give that as a resource for you guys. Like we said, Alice is also, we do training on AI. Recently did Network Rail and took them through the kind of AI training course with Rico about, look, this is all the things you need to know about AI. So if that's of interest, similar to that, you want to help communicate the teams, help them understand more about it. But also, the other aspect of the services we offer is about AI model engineering. So if you want to build specific models and sort of fine-tune them, that's another kind of service we provide as well. Okay. I'm conscious of time, overran. I think it's with me.
We had some more discussion, but I don't know if we've got time for it.
I don't think we'll have time. I don't think we'll have time. Shall we pause for a quick refresh? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay. What time is it now? It's quarter to
5.
It's 4:45. Have a quick coffee and a drink and a refresh. Mike can't join us, but I'll quickly run through for the kind of Network Rail, the kind of vision for Pace Digital and also the regional solution. I think it'll be about 15 minutes. So, cool. All right.